Aloha. My name is Lisa Kleisner, and my husband Charlie is, the two of us will be speaking with you today. And we want to thank HBAN for this amazing invitation to share our journey into impact with all of you. So, as you can tell from my greeting, that I'm an island girl, just like all of you live on an island as well. Only I'm from a different island. I'm from Hawaii and part Hawaiian. My background was as an island girl. I was an environmental activist in high school and in college. And as a result, I chose to do a degree in environmental design and architecture as my sort of contribution to changing up the way we engage with the environment. I became then a partner in a firm in Hawaii that worked on hotels and condominiums in Asia. And it seemed really exciting at first. But again, as I got deeper into it, I realized that this was so far afield from what my passion was about in terms of addressing environmental issues that I stepped away from the firm and married my true love, Charlie, who lived in Europe, who I met when I was 17, and basically changed my life. And so here's Charlie.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and thanks to the organizers and all the viewers. I'm excited about this opportunity and wish we could be there in person. I am a mountain boy from Innsbruck, Tyrol, Austria. And that region was a bit too confining for me when I was growing up there. And that's why I decided to apply for an American Field Service scholarship, which brought me to Hawaii. My Hawaiian adventure in 1974-75 was transformative, opening my horizons on many different levels. And most importantly, I met and fell in love with Lisa. But I had to go back. So in Austria, I studied computer science, did a PhD, and was trained in systems thinking. So for various reasons, we decided to immigrate to Silicon Valley in 1986. And there, after working for Hewlett Packard for a few years, I had the opportunity to work for 3 successful startups. The first one was Next, which was the company that Steve Jobs started after he was fired from Apple. And I was in charge of developing the operating system, which became Apple's main operating system in the late 90s, early 2000s. Then I worked at a company called DataMine as the CTO and VP of engineering, and we analyzed your behavior and actually printed out advertisements, a big business today, which arguably is actually not good for humanity anymore. And my third startup there was Ariba, a business-to-business e-commerce company that we took public in 1999, very successful IPO. And that company stayed independent until 2012, at which point in time it was bought out by SAP. And it was and still is the largest and biggest e-commerce transaction network on the planet, most recently transacting $4.3 trillion per year in commerce. So we diversified our holdings, particularly the holdings in Ariba in 2001 and before the crash of 2001. And that created quite a bit of personal wealth. And so Lisa and I had to ask ourselves the question of the meaning of wealth. And fortunately, we were on the same page and said, well, it is actually a responsibility to do something meaningful with that, and which is now called impact investing. So we thought, what should we do with that? What's our theory of change, our theory of transformation? And Lisa and I are pretty much on the same page on that. So we believe that we are at the beginning of an unprecedented global transformation, that within the next few years, humanity needs to figure out how 10 billion people can sustainably and purposefully live within the carrying constraints of a finitely resourced planet. And this transition leads us from the currently unsustainable path of human evolution to a holistically sustainable path, including environmental, social, financial, and spiritual sustainability. This transition has already started, and systems do change under pressure. And so the question for us is not if, but how and when this transformation will play out. So Lisa, can you share how we got started and how we have been addressing this global transformation, which seems daunting at first glance. So how do we go about doing that?
Well, I would have to also just step back to answer that question that my experience in Silicon Valley also was transformative. And so the seeds that were being planted with your work, working on large systems, I was working on the infrastructure that was supporting young businesses, innovators within Silicon Valley. So I was having an opportunity to take a look at a lot of the new types of, I would call med tech and software companies that were coming through the venture companies and working directly with some of the investor communities to tee up to take a look at the long view on these companies and help them size their infrastructure needs for the short term and for the long term. And that work actually now has translated directly into some of the work that we're doing in impact. And so, well, what it meant was in 2000, when I stepped away from my business, and started to look at what we could do with our capital, the first thing we did, of course, and a lot of folks do, is we set up a foundation. But we quickly found out that philanthropy, the way traditional philanthropy thinks, it didn't align with our value set. And it actually seemed to us to be more damaging than helpful. And so we embarked on a program to retool ourselves through the philanthropy workshop, which really thought differently about philanthropy. And not only did it take us a little bit down the road, but we met Jed Emerson, and that really transformed our thinking. And then we were on supercharge to really think differently and massively about how we were going to deploy philanthropy in a way that was going to build assets and values for communities, that was going to democratize access to capital and resources. So that was step one. Step two was we had to do something with our money. And so we took a look at what the investment opportunities were, and we were, no surprise, completely turned off by what was being offered to us. We were turned off not only by the investments, we were turned off by the actors in the industry who were promoting these products. And so we began a kind of a painful journey of the next 4 years, trying to find someone who would represent our interests and help us move our capital into meaningful investments that were going to be beneficial to people and planet. Back in 2000, that was not an easy task. And then, of course, we realized as we were stepping through these functions that what we were actually wanting to do was to rethink the whole financial system, because those two parts were components of a larger system that we feel is actually quite broken. So what did we do? Well, we took the skills we have, which is on my side design. Charlie's also a designer. He's doing it in a virtual world. I'm doing it in the physical world. We build, both of us build in different ways. We experiment. We're willing to build and fail and learn from it, and then repeat, repeat, wash, repeat. And so taking those skills we learned in Silicon Valley, we started to redesign accelerators and create them to support social enterprises. We built accelerators in India, Vienna for Central Eastern Europe, Hawaii, my home state, and now Charlie is building a brand new one in Tyrol. And I'm really excited about the new one in Tyrol because it also has a leadership component. And then we said, okay, we need to have skin in the game here. So we need to invest, right? So we're going to invest in US companies, European and Asian early stage catalytic social enterprises. And the first step was, of course, you need to find them, diligence them, pull together other investors. And so what birthed out of our investment endeavors were a number of things that Charlie's going to talk about in terms of building networks of other like-minded investors. Some of the investments we did in those early days were the first social impact bond, which some of you may have heard, that was launched in the UK addressing recidivism. That then was very catalytic because it birthed over 100 other new social impact bonds. And the learnings from that actually have birthed yet a whole new generation of how to thinking about how you apply value and how do you monetize impact. And then a very, very early investment. In fact, we were the first investor in the company was BioLite, which is a global outdoor off-grid energy product company. And by being that first investor, we learned how catalytic that could be. By putting our name on it, he was able to attract other investors, and today is a very large, very impactful company. We also would experiment. We realized that the tools coming out of the traditional financial industry didn't fit the organizations and enterprises we were investing in. So we had to start thinking about developing equitable, different types of financial term sheets that were willing to share risk and align better with the financial models of these nascent companies, and also the impact objectives of the investees. And so one example of that development is a tool that John Kohler developed at Santa Clara University, which was the demand dividend, which provides a quasi-equity return by setting a floor and cap on return based on free cash flow, giving these young companies a little bit more flexibility with their cash. And then also we invested in an impact advisory. They didn't exist back in 2000. And so the 4 years where we parked our capital in a savings account, waiting to find the right investments, during that time, we were able to locate someone who had investment experience, and he agreed. And so we made an investment there. But as we dug more into this work over the last 20 years, the more we saw opportunities to go even further and deepen our practice. And so it's not finite, but it's infinite, the opportunities from our perspective. In other words, the more we do, the more we see needs to be transformed. And Charlie's going to talk about some of that transformation. Charlie, to you.
Thank you, Lisa. And the transformation of the financial system and economic system itself is at the core of many things that we do, because we think that some of the fundamental designs of these systems are wrong and need to be fixed. For instance, the assumption that we can exponentially grow with finite resources. You don't need to have a PhD in economics and mathematics that you understand that that's not possible. Maybe it's an impediment if you do, because then some people think. Or the externalities in modern portfolio theory, where that just deals with the very simplistic view of financial returns and risks according to asset classes. That's not sufficient to move forward in a way where negative and positive externalities need to be fundamentally integrated into the system, as opposed to as an add-on like CSR and ESG activities. We need to question the notion of market rate returns, which are built around benchmarks which don't serve the new economy. They're built around the old economy that we could never invest in. So we need to design and deploy new benchmarks that are actually impact benchmarks that have the appropriate financial return depending on the impact risks that we take. We question when to deploy venture capital and private equity in our angel investments. Sometimes it is the right model. Sometimes it is not. A lot of impact investments don't create the financial exits that are necessary in order to attract private equity or venture. They might attract other capital that requires angel investors, but not necessarily equity angel investors. Lisa talked about social impact bonds, which were the first financial instrument that explicitly tied financial return to the positive and negative impact. It hasn't scaled yet. One of the issues is that it's too complicated. I think that tokenization of impact will be solving some of the issues that private equity and venture capital cannot solve. For instance, to involve all the stakeholders with a tokenized economy, as opposed to just the shareholders or the GPs and the LPs. It will allow democratization of impact to be done by anybody with just a few dollars or pounds or whatever denomination they have. We have recently invested in a couple of these efforts, like rainfall and proof of impact, where blockchains and artificial intelligence and high tech come together in order to make a difference in the impact management world, to put impact events on a blockchain in order to verify impact in big supply chains of IKEAs and what have you, in order to help lower maternal risks for the lives of mothers and their babies in order to be in charge of the digital footprint of what we generate all and be able to monetize it for impact and for financial returns. So for all of these things, angel investments are crucial because there's no other investment that actually can get these transformative and catalytic investments off the ground. Now, the new impact economy that I talked about, we know the principles behind that. We know that donut economy is the right model. We know that circularity, regenerativeness, resiliency, regionality, moving from decentralized finance to regenerative finance, as our friend John Fullerton so eloquently puts it, is important with an ethical framework that we all sign up for. Why do we choose not to fix that? Well, the answer to that is actually a lack of consciousness and awareness. And so the deep economy and deep impact investments that Lisa and I are doing are systemic in nature with a view that's non-human centric, non-anthropocentric, that serves the planet and humanity at the same time.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about island economies and and this idea that tech innovation is going to be going to save the economy. So Hawaii had this idea as well. Put the state pumped a lot of money into um, building an innovation center, attracting outside interests to build technology. But what has happened as a result over what we've observed over the last decade is that it's leaving a lot of people behind, and often these businesses, while they develop in Hawaii, they leave Hawaii. And so there is no, so the state's making these investments in companies that don't provide any long-term value to the state of Hawaii. And so there's been a big rethink on what does innovation mean and what kind of innovation should we be supporting that in communities that will stay in the community and provide those essential products and services that communities need to thrive. And I would say that there's been no greater lesson about the importance of this than COVID. When COVID happened, it turned out that the food coming to Hawaii, 90% of it is brought in by boats and planes, but a vast majority of fresh produce is brought in by planes. And those planes stopped coming because the tourists stopped coming. And all of a sudden, the shelves in Hawaii went bare. The distributors had to scramble to hire private planes to go out and fly around the US to pick up product to bring it to Hawaii. And the distributors realized that the whole food system was not only fragile, but it was failing. And so we actually embarked on a joint project to analyze the supply of capital and on the demand side and the supply side, and looking at the movement of capital that's currently supporting the food system, and looking at where the gaps are and how can we strengthen this system through understanding the data involved, and then making some strategic investments, both philanthropic and ones where there's a return of capital. It's to strengthen the foundation of Hawaii food systems. And so this, as you can tell, is a big step away from putting an accelerator where we started to now we're working with the state, with local county governments, with the federal government. We're working with philanthropists, and we're working with the private sector on being more strategic on how we're going to blend capital to solve the systemic issue, in this case, of the Hawaii food system. But we have on our horizon, next up will be housing.
I would also maybe want to mention how that complements some of the work that Lisa and I have done in the context of building modern networks, global networks like Tonic, which we co-founded 11 years ago now. And that's a network of impact investors with 500 plus memberships today. And it's part of our movement building effort to bridge, the global communities with the regional communities. And it's also part of the bridge building effort between the offline communities and online communities. I think, Lisa, we should stop here and conclude with what gives us hope and just quickly sharing with our audience why, in the context of major global issues, we're as energized as ever, if not more, to make our contribution to this change.
Mhm. Thank you, Charlie. So when we started this 21 years ago, and we were we couldn't find folks to support us. We didn't even know how to explain what it is that we were trying to achieve. We just knew that the system and the offerings that were out there just were antithetical to what it was we felt in our heart of hearts we needed to achieve with our capital. And obviously, we've come a long way into realizing the potential, but we're not all the way there yet. During that time, I think the thing that gives me the most hope and continues to give me the most hope is that every time there's been a financial crisis, we see an uptick in the impact market. Charlie, what gives you hope?
um, let me just pull it back or circle back to the big transformation that has started, if you want it or not. And what that means to me and to many other people is that we need to co-develop the new system while enhancing the old system. It's not one or the other, it's actually both. And what gives me hope is that there are many more bridge builders emerging today, people who build the bridges between the old system and the new system. There is no other way. We need to be the architects of our future together. Thank you.